Hey everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We'll be talking today about introducing config as code. I'm really looking forward to this webinar. It should be awesome. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. You won't need to record today's webinar. We'll be doing that job for you. We'll record it and then we'll send you a link to your email a little bit later on so you can concentrate on just listening to the content. For questions and answers, we absolutely welcome those. And please do, you can ask questions in our community Slack at octopus.com/Slack and join the community channel there. Or you can ask it in the Zoom Q&A. Please use the Q&A function specifically. Otherwise, we've got too many places to try and look at questions. So let's focus the questions on there. But absolutely do ask your questions. And at the end, we'll dedicate around 20 minutes for this Q&A section today because last time we did it, we got a whole heap of questions. So we're excited to hear your thoughts and any information you'd like back from us. So moving on, let's introduce our speaker for today, the wonderful Derek Campbell. How are you, Derek?
Hello, Pete and everyone. How are you today, buddy?
Yeah, good. I'm excited. This is my first time hosting a webinar, so that's exciting. And also, this config as code topic is exciting. I've just started looking at that myself, so it'll be really interesting to see what you've got to say today.
Really excited about today's session, Pete. I think just some background as well. We did a session last September where we jumped into how we built config as code, and then a second we done a deep dive with Michael Richardson, where we jumped in and really kind of went it. And then later in a couple of weeks later, we released config as code. So it's a really exciting feature. It's something that we've been working on for the last 2 years, and actually it's a little bit longer than that. So it's a really key feature. We're really excited about it. And so yeah, let's jump on in. So today we're going to talk about what is config as code. We're going to then move on to what's included in config as code, some patterns and anti-patterns. We'll jump in and talk about the roadmap. There's going to be some demos today. It's myself and also Pete. He's got a really cool demo that we'll talk about a little bit later. And then we'll jump in. As Pete mentioned, we have an extra 20 minutes today for Q&A. So let's jump in. So what is config as code? So Octopus deploys config as code feature allows you to store your deployment process in code using the Octopus configuration language, commonly referred to as OCL. It allows you to treat your config as code the same way as your application code, where you can branch your changes and test them before merging them into your mainline branch. It allows you to review and collaborate on changes with others in your development, operations or DevOps teams using branches for testing and pull requests as approvals. And you can even clone existing projects to be used as templates. We do have some tips on that coming up. So that's just something just to be aware of. But yeah. So one of the benefits of config as code is it allows you to track changes to your deployments using the same tools you already use for your development. You can use your text editor of choice to make minor or even major changes as they're built to search, identify and make mass updates to your configuration, much more seamless and straightforward. It allows you to work where you work best. So like for instance, I come from operations. Pete is a developer, which I try not to hold against him too often anyway. But Pete, you're a big advocate and user of VSCode. So obviously like this, where I would do most of my updates in the UI, you're likely going to be wanting to use your existing development tools.
Yeah, absolutely. Please don't hold it against me. I think sadism runs in the family when you're a developer. So yeah, you're right. I like to do it in VS Code. I like to see the code. Personally, I find the process works quite quickly for me when I do that. But I mean, being able to switch to the UI then to be able to try out things perhaps you're not particularly comfortable with in the editor is really, really powerful feature. So yeah, I love it.
Yeah, and we'll be jumping into that a little bit later in the demos, Pete, as well, which is really exciting. So OCL is a human-readable language which is based heavily on HashiCorp's HCL, but we didn't decide to use YAML, JSON, and we actually considered XML, which It's quite funny, right? Obviously, if you want to find out more about the language selection, I would definitely check out last September's webinar where we jump in and why we picked our own OCL. But basically we picked it because so that we could control it, and the main thing is it is human readable. But we do have a VS Code extension, and we're looking at other editors as well. Again, we're also open to receiving some community development, but Pete will jump on the extension a little bit later and give you a demo there. So, not everything is actually moved into your repository, and we will jump into that, and I'll explain exactly what is included in config as code, what's not, and when not to use configuration as code. So that's just we'll jump into in the next few slides. So, what's included in configuration as code? So the main thing just to be aware of is it's mostly the deployment process in this initial release. We do have additional things like the release versioning and the release notes templates, etc. The deployment targets required, transient deployment targets, any changes, and your default failure mode as well. I will show you that in code in just a moment as well in today's demo. So what's actually stored in the Octopus database? So it's a whole heap of things. To be honest, it is mostly the deployment process that is included in this first version of configuration as code. So this is just something to be aware of. There are a whole heap of things. I don't want to spend too much time looking at this. One thing just to be aware of is if you come on over to our docs, you'll see that we have a range of documentation that will help you through this. There'll be some things here that breaks down exactly what is and what's not version controlled. So that's just something to spend some time and have a look at. I don't want to go and spend too much time on what's not version controlled. So again, infrastructure, your environments, deployment targets, workers. There are other ways to do this. So that's just something just to be aware of. Things like the Terraform provider could definitely work there. So that's just something to pay attention to. So things like your library. This would definitely work with your Terraform. So you can actually use configuration as code, but it's through the Terraform provider. So all of these are not version controlled at this time. So this is just something I just wanted to let you aware of, to be aware of. So things like if you're trying to manage the number of nodes, no, that wouldn't be something that you would want to do in using configuration as code for Octopus deploy. Okay, so there are no plans to for us to add any of those things. What we have on the roadmap is our variables and also our runbooks. This is something that's on the roadmap, and I'll jump into that a little bit. But if it's in the scaffolding of Octopus, then generally it's probably more the Terraform provider that I would recommend. So you can manage these in source control using the Terraform provider. And we recently ran that webinar where the VP of Customer Solutions, Mr. Bob Walker, and Senior Solutions Architect Sean Cessna take you through some use cases. So that's just something to be aware of. And if you're going to pay attention to one slide and one slide only, this is the slide to pay attention to. The configuration as code feature is not designed to allow 2 or more projects on different instances to point to the same folder. It's not a way to sync multiple instances of Octopus. What we generally see is, you may have a dev and a test, and then maybe a production or one that works in isolation. And we've seen people try to do it, and initially it'll probably work for you, but the scenario is unsupported. The main reason is it will be harder and harder to manage over time. You'll need to keep all of the scaffolding data in sync across multiple instances, which is much easier than it actually is. It sounds a lot easier than it actually is. Step templates, for instance, would be the most difficult. As having the same step template in all instances, the version has to match up, so you'd have to make those updates at the same time, make sure that no deployments are happening, and then otherwise you'll have to worry about settings such as parameters, scripts, package versions and more. Generally you're not going to have a good time, but the configuration feature it's not designed to do that. We do have other tools, there are ways to do that, and I would check out our documentation. And the main thing is you may be successful at first, but our Another option is to have a single Git repo for all of your projects, where you can store each of your projects saved into a unique folder in the repository. That is a valid approach, but it's just something to be aware of. Okay, so let's jump in and talk about some of the patterns. This is the single biggest pattern we're seeing. And Pete, I imagine, coming from development, you're probably going to want to keep your your deployment process alongside your code so that you can see it, right?
Yeah, specifically, and then be able to track the changes together with each other. I think that's quite powerful. Obviously, we're checking this in with our source control, so I think it's useful to be able to do that.
Yeah, this is the biggest pattern I see. The thing I like is often what I see is sometimes people don't have access to Octopus. You may have development level access. You can't release. So the good thing here is you still get to see the deployment and what's happening in it, right, Pete? If everything's in code.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you may not have a very high level access at all to the UI section, perhaps, of Octopus Deploy, but as a developer, you still get visibility over what that process is. I think that's really important because obviously you need to know that potentially as a developer, what you're feeding into. So it's good for that all-round DevOps culture.
Oh, definitely. I think, ultimately you're making everyone aware. And also some of the things the other patterns are including like your branches as drafts, pull requests as approvals. You can use branch-specific variables. It's just something to be aware of. Variables is not in this first release, so that's just something just to be aware of. You can leverage your development tools, like obviously Pete was mentioning earlier on, but also you can leverage a UI as well, whilst also using Git, and I'll give you a demo of that just in a moment. So how do you use it? So first things first is you have to be on 2022.1 or above for it to have the version that I'm going to be demoing to you today. Converting an Octopus project is a one-way process. I will repeat this one more time. Converting an Octopus project is a one-way process. So if you ever want to go back to your previously non-version control project, and those are fine. You can also choose not to use version control. Those will work just fine. But one of the things is make sure that you clone any test projects before you version control it, as at that point you can't go back to it. So what I would say is clone it, enable config as code, and then at that point continue with your testing. Make sure that you validate that it works as you expected. Obviously, I don't want you losing your job because you did something a little bit silly. So just please be careful there. That is something that we just recommend that you roll it out in stages across the company. And I think one of the key things here, Pete, is you want to implement your standards. Obviously, you as a developer, you're familiar with your coding and naming conventions and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and I mean that applies all the way through this. And actually, while you were speaking there, I think it's obviously bear in mind that when you go down this route of infrastructure as code, that it's now in your GitHub repo, potentially, if that's where you're going. So make sure you don't put anything sensitive in that, because if it's a public repo now, everybody can see. So yes. Yeah, I think conventions and security are two things that you've got to bear in mind when you go down this route if you're not used to doing it. Yes,
and with everything else, Pete, feedback is also welcome. If you do have an interesting use case that we have not covered today, please do reach out to us. So that's definitely something to have a look at. Okay, so config as code roadmap. We did release it in early access preview in November last year. The deployment process is live as of 2022.1. Variables and runbooks will be rolled out roughly at the same time, probably Q3, Q4. I know that variables, they are being worked on just now, so that is something just to be aware of. So at this point, let's be honest, this is why you're here. You want to see the demo. Okay, so we're going to jump on over to Octopus. So what we've got here is we've got our webinar instance. As you can see up here, the space is config as code. That's webinar.octopus.app. We've got Octo Pet Shop. And for those who are on today's call, this is probably not the first time you've seen Octo Pet Shop. But for those that are not, Octo Pet Shop is an application that we have developed just to show off Octopus Deploy. It's made up of a few services. I'm not going to spend too much time on Octo Pet Shop. The key thing here is we're trying to show off configuration as code. So first things first, let's start with enabling an existing project. And one thing just to, I haven't followed best practices there, but if you did come into the project switcher here, you can select to export a project, and then what I would do is export that into maybe a test space, test your changes, and then at that point you can start rolling it out. So that's just something to be aware of. So at this point, what you're going to see is you have Octo Pet Shop. We have our deployment process. You can see here we have our create infrastructure. So we run a runbook at the beginning of this just for test, and this creates the infrastructure on the fly. So this is something here. You've got your health check, your manual intervention. I'm not going to spend too much time going through the deployment process. This is not the purpose of today's webinar. The purpose is to show you the workflow using configuration as code. But as you can see, you've got 10 steps. Let's come on over. We're going to come down to version control. We're going to see, here we go. So with this is you can set up your version control. You do that within the project configuration. You need a way to connect to Git. So obviously in this instance we're using GitHub, but any Git repository works. It won't work with other version control systems, and there's no intentions of us releasing that. So at this point you've got your Git repository, your default branch name, and then your authentication option. So you can authenticate anonymously, but obviously unless you have anonymous updates in your repo, you're probably not going to be able to write to it unless you use that internally. So I won't spend too much time on anonymous. Again, you can use username and password. So that's per project. Or if you come up to library, I will show you in just a minute, there is a way for you to enable a service account. So let's start with, there we go. So we've got our DevOps Derek. We've got a DevOps Derek repository. We're going to come in and grab our repository URL. There we go. We've got our main branch, we've got a library. In this instance, I am just going to select the service account. So Pete, this is actually where you specify your Git file storage directory. This will be in the .octopus folder by default. So in this instance, what I'm doing is I'm just going to save it to the default folder. If you decided to use a single repository for all of your deployment processes, you would specify the directory. So you'd probably put the project folder name in here, as you can see. So you've got project folder name. In this instance, we're just going to pop it into the default Git file storage directory, and then I'm going to select test. This is good. Again, in production, I'm probably not going to do that. So at this point, you are about to enable version control. So you're about to configure to use version control. Please note that this process cannot be undone. I will state, please note that this process cannot be undone. So again, like I was saying earlier on, this is a one-way conversion. So initial commit, here we go. So at this point, it's going to connect to the URL. It's going to grab the default branch name, which in this instance is main. It's authenticated using the server account, and then it's stored in the Octopus folder. So at this point, I'm going to come back to Octopus Pet Shop. I'm going to do a refresh. And then at this point, you can see the .octopus folder. So what's in the .octopus folder? Well, there you go. You have your deployment process, your deployment settings, and the schema version. For the most part, the schema version you can ignore. Deployment settings does have some things like I said earlier on. You have your policy, you have your versioning strategy, and all that good stuff. But let's be honest, Pete, this is obviously why people are coming. Let's have a look at this deployment process.
Definitely exciting.
Yeah. So as you can see, similar to what we've seen in the URL, Pete, what we've actually got is you'll see here that there is a common pattern. You've got your step, and then afterwards you've got your action items, and you'll jump into that a little bit later. But as you can see, what you've got is obviously the create infrastructure for test, unsurprisingly, only runs for the test environment. Under this, you've got things like your properties. You've got action template IDs. You've got run books. And like I said earlier on, with the run books, with the variables, this is something that will be coming later in the year so that you'll be able to create the variables using config as code as well. So that's just something to be aware of. And then after that, you've got your health check. And then again, you've got, obviously this is all built in. You've got your manual intervention required. You've got your deploy, your Azure web app. And as you can see, you've got, there should be 10 steps total. So this is just something just to be aware of. So in this one, I'm going to come on over to the deployment process. At the top here, you have your branch switcher. So this is just something, let's do fetch. This does run in the background, Pete. It runs about I think it's between every 30 and 60 seconds. So that's just something just to be aware of. So what we're going to do is, because it's Star Wars Day today, may the 4th be with you, there's definitely, may the config as code be with you there, Pete, as a joke.
Yeah, no one's anyone's father on this though.
Oh, yeah, that's true. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually just going to update the notes, right? So demo for config as code. There will be a few little Star Wars references throughout today's code. So demo, sorry. So if you select commit, again, you've got your updated deployment process. So you've got your option here. You can commit it straight to the mainline branch. Pete, as as I'm sure you recommend, you should never do mainline branch edits, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, and at this point, if you are creating a branch, make sure that you name it something nice. I mean, this is a demo, so Derek's using -patch1, but you need to give other people some visibility of what that particular branch is supposed to be doing, because it could be quite, semantic changes you're making deep down in that process that no one's going to spot just by switching branches. So, yeah, be nice to your other employees.
To be honest, I think you make a really good point there. Really treat it like code, right? Make nice obviously commit messages, make ones that don't drop to blah 1, don't do that, but like that. So as you can see, what we should be able to do, so I just want to show that let's go back to the code. So at this point we can switch to the DevOps Derek-patch one, and then we come into .octopus, come into the deployment process, and there we go, demo for config as code. So the changes that I've made in the UI are present, as you can see. So we'll come back to the deployment process. We should see, there we go. And then if we switch it back to the mainline branch, there we go. So you can see there that it's there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come here and I'm going to, so the changes there, pull requests. Let's do a pull request, Pete. At this point, at this point, I could create the release, go ahead, deploy my updates, test it, make sure it's good, and then see we've pushed it to dev, test, pre-prod, for instance, everything's good. So that's just something just to be aware of. That is actually something. So So at that point, I can now actually do I can merge that in. I actually have a parent one that I've done there, but just something just to be aware of is, so DevOps Derek Octopus. So what we've got here is we're merging this in code. There we go, select create pull request. At this point, we're going to do merge pull request. And what we should see is, if we just give this a little refresh, it's just this is the little 30-second. So at this point we should see that DevOps Derek is gone. Yeah, so that's when we're just going to delete that branch now, And then there we go. We've got a demo for config as code. So however you approach this, whatever change you want to make, maybe change the manual intervention to run for different environments. If you wanted to change it out for a different hosting and you wanted to move from Azure Web Apps to another service, this is all something you can do in code. What's your thoughts on it, Pete?
Yes, I mean, the way you demonstrated it there, sort of, it shows us how powerful this is, where specifically you're able to do this either in the UI or indeed in GitHub online, because Derek is that brave. He can do all of this online directly, or in VS Code, editor of your choice, and move between them as well. So it could be that your process actually is a hybrid between these two approaches. It could be you copy and paste a bunch like a good developer does in VS Code, and then you do some minor tweaking in the UI. Or you could, add big blocks in the UI and then come in and do your tweaking in VS Code. It's great. It's really super flexible. I do love it.
I think that's the main thing, Pete. It really does allow you to work wherever you work best. Like that. To be honest, if I was making huge updates, I would probably drop to VS Code. And then at that point, hey, I make a mistype something, because to be honest, I fat finger everything. So with that, you can make those changes very straightforward. So one thing just to be aware of as well is if you come into library and you come into Git credentials, you can add Git credentials. So again, you would call this say service account. You'd pop in a description, and then from there you could put your username and your personal access token or your password. And then that way you can actually share multiple projects, but you can also do it on a per project version as well. So if you come into Octopus Shop and then you come into the version control, there are ways here that you can just go in. So if it's something you have to run as a proof of concept, you can use temporary bits there as well. Okay, so that's the demo of that particular project done. What we're now going to do is we're going to come into project, and I'm actually going to create one from scratch. So I'm going to select add project. I'm just going to call this demo for config as code. And then there's an option here. There's some advanced options. One thing is use version control for this project. I'll be honest with you. You don't have to use version control for everything. You can just use how people have used it historically. The idea really is we'll never force you to use one or the other like some other tools do. In this instance, you will be able to make changes in the UI and using config as code. That is the idea there is those should always be able to be interchangeable. And it's, if I'm being honest, it's also one of the main reasons why it took 2 years to develop, is we wanted that full feature in the browser and also for developers and people who like to live in code. So at this point, we're going to do this. Again, we can save all this information, select save. In this instance, I do have my demo. As you can see, this is just an empty repository. I'm just going to pop that URL in. Okay, again, I'm just going to use the service account. In this instance, what I'm just going to call it is demo for CAC. That's short for config as code. The idea here is if you did want to use that one repository for all of your deployment processes to store your config as code, this is how you would do it. Our general recommendation is to avoid that way, but what we do is let's do this. Let's do initial commit. Select commit. Okay, so just give that a second. At that point, it's went ahead and actually stored that there. So let's refresh. At this point, you should see, there we go. So you've got your .octopus folder, and then there is a demo for configuration as code folder in there as well. Much like we did before, this is something you can do. So again, you can store it alongside your application code, and that is our recommendation here, because you want to be updating your deployment process alongside your application code as well. So that's just something to be aware of. Again, we come in here, we've got our deployment process, and if you come into here, as you can see, there is no deployment process. So let's create some. So select add step. At this point, you're probably going to, obviously, I always start with my my approval. I think Pete, you start with pushing everything to production by default, right?
Yeah, no tests, no health checks, just straight to prod, and then do that sort of 5 o'clock on a Friday, and then turn your phone off. It's good.
Oh yeah, definitely. Do you know, that doesn't always deploy on Fridays. But yeah, it's funny. It's obviously I used to work before a previous company, and I used to have really kind of strict, like, you weren't allowed to deploy on a Friday. But the good thing is we switched to Octopus Deploy, and now it's deploy anytime. So one thing that I've always really liked is in August 2020 we made the you were able to start making mass updates. Before that, you used to have to update a deployment state at a time, select save. Now, obviously, what you could do, what we've released in August 2020, was the ability to make multiple updates, because it makes it a lot easier to use. So in this instance, you actually see what I've actually got here is the deployment process, and then I'm going to just hit add step again. So you can actually have to commit it each time. You can make multiple changes, so that's something to be aware of. So I'm going to run a script. I'm going to run this on a worker. I'm going to run the hosted Windows, and then I'm going to write some bad PowerShell that says help me obey. One, you probably see where I'm going with this, Pete.
Yeah, nice reference.
I think so too. Actually, I'm going to have to watch Star Wars tonight now, just to celebrate Star Wars Day. So at this point, you can select commit. There is also an option there for a quick commit. So if you press the commit button, it will give you the ability to input your commit. And be nice to your fellow developers or your DevOps engineers. In this instance, I'm just going to do a quick commit. As you can see, nothing there was required. So in this instance, again, we've got this in the main branch. So at this point, what we should see, there we go. So again, let's just do that configuration. Let's just make a, and then I'm just going to, happy. Oh, I have to do this actually. May the config as code be with you.
How droll.
So at this point, I'm going to do the commit. I'm going to do it to a new branch. Testing new PowerShell script, which is there we go, and then we're going to select this to PowerShell updates. So we're going to select commit, and then we're going to come over and we're going to see that we have all branches. So there we go, we've got our PowerShell updates. If you come in, you should see, actually you should be able to see the new update. So what we've got here is may the config as code be with you. So again, let's go back, do the pull request.
I really like that process. If you've got this in a single GitHub repo and you've got maybe a couple of projects attached to it, and you're using two separate directories as you should do. So we've got two lots of OCL files. Is there a procedure that you'd suggest if you wanted to, say, copy steps in between those two rather than copying and pasting sort of entire things?
Yeah, to be honest, that's sort of the whole point. To make your mass updates, do it in code. So what you can do is make, say for instance, you wanted to add a new step to everywhere. You can just copy that OCL file, right, and then just add it to multiple deployment processes. So whether you want to make those updates, actually, I would go so far as to say that's exactly what your text editor is really built for, those mass updates. So if you want to, say you had 100 projects and you wanted to do that, it would be much easier to do that using config as code. The other thing is, as well, you used to be able to do that over the API, Pete, whereas obviously that will always be possible. But like VSCode, right? You can jump in, you can search, you can update. That whole workflow is optimized for that, which is really good, right?
Yeah, regex, super powerful.
Oh, regex. I think there's one person in the world that actually knows regex, and the rest of us copy and paste off them. But that's so there we go. So obviously, as we've got here, we've got a manual intervention. We've got run a script as well. So if you did, I can make those updates. Whether really whether I'm using VS Code, whether I'm using GitHub Online, or whether I'm actually just doing it in the Octopus UI. Really, it's up to you. Wherever that's the benefit here, is you can work wherever you work best here, Pete. And yeah, so at this point, Pete, you have a demo where you're going to show off working with OCL and the extension.
Yeah, and I mean this is cool, as Eric sort of alluded to a couple of times leading up to this. I tend to live most of my life in VS Code. That's where I'm comfortable. Turning pizza into lines of code is a good thing to do. But if you are a VS Code user and you want to do most of your work over here rather than in, say, the UI in Octopus Deploy, then we have a really nice extension for you, free of charge, of course. So you can click the little extensions tab, search for Octopus, and then you'll find this lovely Octopus Deploy extension ready for you to use with some information. I've obviously already got this thing installed because I'm a good member of Octopus Deploy. But you'll find some information about what this extension is giving you. But if I open up my file explorer, I've got the same Octopet Shop solution that Derek has got. It's a different branch, that's all. But if I come into the deployment process, what you'll see here is that this is all nicely syntax highlighted for us. So you can see our create infrastructure for test step, where the keywords are all highlighted out for us, along with the text. What you will see here again is various variables. Don't forget, you're going to be managing them in the UI rather than here. That is coming, and we'll let you know when that's available. I'm quite excited to see where this goes with that actually in Runbooks. You can see there, if we scroll down, then we've got the health check. And this makes it sort of far easier to read. If you remember from the GitHub version that Derek was showing you, that was all just plain white. Whereas this one, we could pick the individual pieces out here. So I think syntax highlighting, certainly if you're a developer, it's what you'd expect to see. Another little... Oh, go on now, Derek. Absolutely.
No, to be honest, this just makes... So, to be honest, when you actually work in the UI, a lot of what you're seeing here is actually hidden from you. Things like how you deal with the error handling. That's actually something that, you have to unfurl, whereas with config as code, you see all in a single pane of glass, right, Pete?
Yeah, exactly. And you can flick between, because it could be that you're building your process and your code at the same time, and that's entirely likely. And so you can just switch quick between these two things. But I mean, the thing I like is that we get that versioning history. I think that's probably, for me, that's one of the most important parts of all of this, is that we can see where this thing is developed and the notes that go along with that. And obviously you can do some of that in the UI as well. But from a developer, just look at your Git commit history and you can see what people were thinking when they were doing it. So you mentioned there, the visibility. There's another lovely little thing. If we click this new lovely little Octopus Explorer icon, then we get a tree view version of this, which allows us to be able to scroll around in our document. And this document could get quite big. So this really handy to be able to click on, say, the action for the deploy, the shopping cart web app, and that just pops out here. So you can navigate through and get a quick overview of what these parts are. So that's useful. But on top of that, if I scroll up, say, after we've created our infrastructure and we're happy that the health checks passed, so our infrastructure is up, if I add a few lines in here, we can also insert snippets, which will scaffold out steps and actions for us. So there's a step with some scaffolding around it. And if I say go in here, we can also do an action and scaffold that out. You'll see actually it gives us all of the properties that are available to us, and you might not actually want them. And certainly when you're watching a demo like this, the last thing you want to do is watch me fill all of that lot in. So it could be, for instance, that if I just get rid of all of the action and replace it with some code I made earlier in good UK Blue Peter style, it could be that you just want to have a little information message there that says that the health check's passed and your infrastructure has been deployed. So we can see here we've got an action type of script and the properties for that are the script body, and then we're just spitting out that the Octopet shop infrastructure has been deployed successfully there. But you can see what the benefit of this is, that I can insert multiples of those very fast, way faster than I think I could in the UI. So copy and paste, like every good developer, really works well in this paradigm. I like that. And yeah, I save that file, create a new branch like any good developer will, do the PR, and then that's a part of your main process then at that point. So yeah, super powerful, really impressed with where it is, and I'm really excited to see where it goes.
And this is just the beginning as well, Pete. John Bristol, who was part of the team that developed this, is always looking for feedback and everything that comes with that. So what I'd do is definitely, if you're using config as code, I would check out the extension. I think it'll make configuration as code much easier to work with. But yeah, thank you very much for that. That was really awesome. And yeah, so at this point, I was going to do a quick recap. So what we've done today is we went through what is config as code, what it's not, some patterns, anti-patterns, and then in today's demo, we took an existing project, Octopet Shop, and then we enabled config as code using the service account. You can do that on a per project basis, but the feedback we received is the service account is generally best. We won't tell you how best to manage that in GitHub. That's definitely something I would recommend you do. And then after that, we went through, we have actually taken a fresh project and then enabled by default at the very start a brand new version control project. And Pete, thank you very much for giving that awesome demo on our new extension for configuration as code.
Oh, I loved it. Yes, it's dead cool.
I think so too. So at this point, is there any questions, Pete? I see that there's several actually.
Yeah, it's looking interesting. Thanks for that, Derek. That was really interesting. Really enjoyed that. That whole process looks fantastic. But yeah, there's a few questions in there. Phoenix team has asked, how does a release know which branch to use?
Great question. So in the you can do this on the CLI or the branch if you're using, say, a build plugin. But say, for instance, you create the release here, and then inside of Octopus, you can actually switch. In this instance, I do only just have the main branch, so you would just select it here, specify the version, update your packages, and then on you go. Really, yeah, it's that straightforward.
I like it. Emeris has asked, what are the pros and cons of one repo per deployment project versus one repo with multiple folders per deployment project? We store our application code separately.
To be honest, I think there really is, I think like anything really, you want your deployment code alongside your application code. I think for me that is, everyone sees exactly what's happening in the deployment process, so you can kind of obviously plan for that. Where we actually have multiple folders, so in a single repository, I'm thinking multiple projects in Octopus maps to this single repo. To be honest, that also works. The main thing is each project should be unique. That definitely works. I've actually tested it. So say, for instance, you had your full application. Yeah, so basically our recommendation is to store it alongside your application code. I think there it just gives visibility, Pete, and it allows everyone to see exactly what's happening, and then you can actually see exactly what's happening. But multiple projects per repository using different folders is definitely a way that we could do it. The main thing is make sure that you keep it unique. Different repository, different Octopus projects shouldn't. It shouldn't be multiple projects per repository, per folder. Sounds good.
Yeah, excellent. Carl has asked, how are errors handled if the committed code is wrong? That's a good question.
Yeah, really good. What happens is you'll get an error message in Octopus and it will tell you to go and fix it. At that point, what I would probably do is drop the code, revert your changes, or but also I think as well, Pete, you did a great demo there with the VSCode extension. There's a whole bunch of tools there that you can capture, so that obviously the error handling is actually captured in code as well. So yeah, I think that really works.
Yeah, I like that. That extension's dead handy as well. So, and I guess that's going to be in constant development moving forwards as we develop the features around this. So,
Yeah, this is
yeah.
just the first draft. The key thing for us is runbooks is next, and with variables, that'll be our. And also, we are obviously fixing up any bugs that we do. But the good thing is we have had about 3-4 months where this has been in the wild and behind an early access preview feature flag. So we do have a whole bunch of feedback. But again, if you spot any issues, please do reach out to us, and we'll definitely get that done.
Sounds good. So Phoenix Teams asked another good question. How do custom steps migrate to code?
It depends on what you mean by a custom step. If you're talking about the community code, the community templates, they should be able they should work. If you're thinking your own step templates, those won't work. Again, looking at here, one thing so your step templates won't actually work. However, what you can do is reference your step templates. What I would recommend doing there is cloning your existing project that you're using a step template, convert it the clone copy using your step templates, and you should see how that works for you. So with that, so anything that's a step template, that won't work. But what you will be able to do is actually reference it as code. But what I would recommend doing there is testing it. And if you have any issues, please do reach out to us, and we'll have a look at that.
Awesome stuff. Evie has asked, is there a difference between built-in steps and custom steps?
I think that's the same as the last question. So effectively same idea. So with the Octopus community one, the Octopus provided one, those are all native. The community step templates you should be able to work with those. But what I'd recommend again is just testing.
That makes sense. And when using an OCL file, is there any difference when adding built-in steps and custom steps? I think that's a very similar.
That's the same question.
Again. So same thing. And Frederick has asked, can you restrict which branches can apply to which environments or channels, like only allow main or deploy to production?
Yes. So effectively what you should be able to do is channel versioning rules. So with that, what you could do is say for instance, you wanted to beta test something. You'd probably create a versioning rule that says, it must be called channel X or branch X. And then what you can effectively do is just map that there. So that, you should be able to do that. Again, what I just do is test it out, and then we will also be able to help you out there as well.
Sounds good. Do we? A question from me actually. Do we have a public roadmap of features being added in general? But obviously, if you want to keep track of config as code as a feature, is there something we make public for when things are likely to come along?
Yeah, so we don't have anything specific to config as code, but if you come on over to octopus.com/company/roadmap, if you just put /roadmap, it'll redirect you. And yes, what you'll see is we list all our upcoming features, so like AWS Lambda support, dynamic infrastructure, ServiceNow. And then there we go. So there's config as code for runbooks. So if you want to keep updated, you can just select keep me updated, and then it'll ask your details there. And then what we'll do is you'll see is things will happen a little bit later. And this here is another question as well, Pete.
Yes, indeed. So once converting an existing project, will it be fully converted into code, or do we need to configure additional stuff to support the transition? That's a really good question, Phoenix. Thank you.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Phoenix, effectively what will happen is your deployment process will come in. So what to do is when, like I showed you earlier on in the demo, when you activate it, these three files are created. So with this, you've got your deployment process. So everything in here, you will see the entire process in code. You should be able to do it. So with that is literally, so you've got your deployment process, your deployment settings, and then the schema version. I've never actually touched the schema version. And then if you come into the deployment settings, this is where I was saying earlier on, what's as part of it, you've got your versioning strategy as well. But for the most part, it should be fairly straightforward. You should be able to activate it, and it is just the deployment process at this time and associated settings.
Sounds good. And one way. Oh.
That's it. That's the biggest thing is that is a one way that honestly I can't stress that enough. Because to be honest, let's be honest, Pete, we got burnt by that. So obviously we were playing about with this and we version controlled something as part of that I had to recreate from scratch. So don't be like Derek and Pete and make sure that you back up or export, import, or clone your project before doing a POC. Once you obviously pass that POC, then go ahead and do it. You'll be fully aware. But the thing is, well, the biggest recommendation I can also make is implement standards. So work with your developers, work with your DevOps engineers, and actually create standards so that not, developer A isn't storing an application and then developer B is in a different, is a different strategy. The main thing I'd say is make sure that when you roll this out, that you plan to roll it out. Think about things like Git authentication, service accounts, everything there. The thing is you can use per project authentication. So that is a viable way to authenticate it. But that's really only viable because, to be honest, that was one of the biggest things that we had feedback-wise from the EAP was we need shared authentication so that we can obviously have service accounts, because can you imagine, developer A leaves the business, his Git credentials are holding config as code, and then that person leaves and then the entire Octopus deploy just goes, hey, we're broken. You can fix it, thankfully, but with that, definitely think about implementing standards, give some serious thought to your authentication approach. And yeah, just obviously talk to your team members and make the best decision for you and your organization.
That makes sense. Carl's asked another good question as well. Would this effectively remove the need to set different variables for different environments, as I could store different variables for development and production?
Yes and no. I think that at this time, Carol, that would be incorrect. But once we have variables, that might be the case. So you could actually just have different variables for different branches. So yeah, that could work. What I would say, Carol, is just give it some more thought. Wait until that's out. But yeah, I don't see any issues with that approach. So effectively, yeah, you could actually have your different variables for develop branch and the production branch. Come on, there's more questions. We've got time here, folks. Get your questions in. I'll get those answered for you.
Absolutely.
That was really good. That was really good.
It was.
Thank you very much.
I mean, it's really interesting, and yeah, I'm looking forward to the runbooks as code. I think that would be an important addition to this. And then, yeah, you mentioned variables as well. Those two things will really flesh this out. When we go forward, but it's super powerful as it is now. So it's well worth going and playing with in your cloned repository, cloned project.
I think the thing I like about it is it's not like other tools out there. I'm not going to name tools, but Azure DevOps, great. I love Azure DevOps, but like that, I love the classic editor. To be honest, I use the classic editor, get my build working, and then export it to YAML. I love YAML, and obviously with that, there's great stuff there, but yeah, you can definitely do it. I think the key thing with this feature, Pete, is that it really puts the power wherever you feel best. Like you're obviously you're at most comfortable with code, but to be honest, like you, if you're just going to make a quick minor update, you probably don't need to use VSCode for that, right? So you can just use, hey, just click that, like I've did on, I'm much more comfortable in the browser using Git, but at the same time so it really does put the power of where you need it, and once we get variables and runbooks, I feel like, hey, that's a really good place to start from. If you are scaffolding Octopus, then I would definitely recommend the Terraform provider. John Bristow's team has done a fantastic job there. We have also done a recent webinar there as well. So if you want to scaffold things like environments, accounts, etc., then you want to be looking at the Octopus deployed Terraform provider. Right, at that point, Pete, it looks like the questions have been wrapped up.
Yeah, I did have another quick question. Is there some form of API integration here as well with config as code, or I don't even know what use case there would be for that, but I guess when this thing gets fleshed out more, that it'll become a requirement.
Yeah, I mean everything that's in everything that's in Octopus is controllable via the API. Defining something as config as code I'm not sure about that, but definitely that's maybe something to have a look at, Pete. I think that could be your next webinar, using the API to define config as code. I'm not sure. But to be honest, with that, I'm sure there's a way to do it. But the thing I'd say is, you would probably need, just thinking this through my head, you would probably need to make sure that your service or your Git authentication's in place, and then from there, actually, there should be a way to do it. I'm just not sure how at this juncture.
Aha! I asked you a question. That was good.
Yes, you did. Any others?
No, that's all the questions. That was really good questions. Obviously, you can ask us questions after the webinar, and we'll go through a few slides that'll explain how to do that in a minute. But yeah, thanks for all your questions, folks. They were really good.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Pete.
Absolutely. Go ahead and you can reach out to our customer success at octopus.com email address there if you'd like to find out a bit more about how you can become an Octopus customer and ask them any questions around that you need to. And if you need any advice, we do offer a free consultancy to all our customers. So you can reach out to the advice@octopus.com email address to ask them any questions and get some help on your deployments there. We do subscribe to our YouTube channel. We've got a whole host of really great content on there. So you can go back through all of our previous webinars there and catch up on demand. So that's at the youtube.com/Octopus Deploy address. And before we finish up, don't forget that if you want a bit more of me, then you can come along on May the 18th, where Chris Reddington and I will be talking about how we can use GitHub Actions in our CI/CD pipeline along with Octopus Deploy. So that's going to be quite an interesting topic to go through, actually, so we can combine the power of GitHub Actions with the awesome Octopus Deploy product. But yeah, thanks so much for coming along. The recording will land in your inbox in the next few days, so you can watch again any parts that you may have missed or want to dive into a bit more detail on. So thanks so much for coming along, and we'll see you all soon.
May the configures code be with you. Thanks, and goodbye. Bye.